Gary, it looks like they found the right link.
Looks that way.
I hope.
Looks that way. We have
I think it's
almost
great.
30 people. Yes.
Yeah, so far. Is
Couple of people
Allendale
in
Beach, would that be our, well, she can't hear me yet, can she? Norma? Yeah, not yet. All right.
Tell me when you're ready.
Yeah, we're gonna start like any moment. Give it like 1 more minute. Michael, are there people waiting? Are you okay?
There's a couple more people coming in now.
Okay, let's let them come in. And
I mean, you're not even at 12 yet. You're at 11:58.
really, my computer says 12:02.
That's
Mine
what
too.
mine says.
It's 12:02.
That's what mine
But I
says.
have you.
12:02.
Okay, mine's slow.
A computer. All right. All righty. You know what? 12:02. Let's give it to 12:03 and then we start. Oh, good. See, Lori Wyman knows how to follow instructions. Question. Put them in the chat room. Hi, Michelle. Long time no see. Donna Joseph, Brianne. Hello, hello. David DePaz, Michael Windrow. Hello, hello.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Lori.
All righty.
Hi, David.
Kim and
Donna,
Shalom. Hello,
Nice to
my
see
dear.
you.
We need to talk, my dear. Yeah, she's trying to get on too. Okay, you know what?
Hold on.
12:03.
There's a whole bunch coming in.
A whole bunch. Okay. 12:03, you know. Goodness gracious.
You've trained them.
Oh,
They
Nicole,
know
you're very
12.
popular.
Yeah.
Hey, Kim.
Oh,
Kim
Kim
says-
Ben Shalom says I can't unmute. Wow.
Can you unmute her? The host might be able to. Hey, Ruby.
Yeah.
We should
Hi,
follow along.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, hello, Ruby. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
guys.
Very good. All right. As soon as you let in that last group,
All right. I think you
okay,
are
let's
good to
start,
go.
and then the others you can let in as we go. Okay.
Yeah, but I do know a lot of
Ready?
people did come in late. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat box and I'm going to put everyone on mute once the program starts. Please do not unmute. If you do have a question, please use your chat box. So Gary, all yours.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second round of the step-by-step program for the Paycheck Protection Forgiveness Program. Thank you for taking time out at a little after 12 o'clock on this Tuesday. First of all, a couple of housekeeping items. As always, a big thank you to our Zoom administrator, Michael Stern. We all know the things that Michael does, but here's a couple of tidbits just for today to start this off. I'm sure Michael appreciates this. Michael is also a real estate investor, partner in Sternblum Media, and I didn't know this, that they have their specialty photo studio. Also, for you guys to know, Michael is also, and they do an outstanding job. So for those of you that don't know about this, please pay attention to this. He's also chairman of the Aventura Police Department's Community Advisory Board. So they're the ones that did the haunted house last year and things like that. They've got a lot of great stuff planned for the community. So please pay attention to all those announcements that come out from the Police Department's Advisory Board. Also a candidate for 2022, a year away, 2022 Aventura City Commissioner. And as you all know, prior to this, Michael was the former Vice Mayor for the city of Aventura. So we all know Michael knows the city well, but over this last year, he has been our Zoom extraordinaire. So as always, Michael, thank you so much for giving of your time. As the first round, we are delighted to have some of our partner chambers with us today. So as I read your names off, please just give a short hello so we can get started with Nicole so everybody recognizes who is here. So first of all, from the Greater North Miami Beach Chamber, Evan Piper and Leslie Lowenthal.
Hello there, guys. Thanks for having us today and including us in the program. Really looking forward to another outstanding program from Nicole. So thanks again.
Norma English from the Greater Hollandale Beach Chamber. Going once. Randy Shane, Greater Dania Beach Chamber.
Thank you, Elaine and Gary, and of course, Michael, you are amazing. We really appreciate you including us in these PPP forgiveness and how to apply for them rounds.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining with your chamber. Marie Suarez from the Greater Hollywood Chamber. Going once. Carrie Black from South Dade Chamber. Going once again. All right, Nicole, we're getting to you. So as we were on our first round, and again, Nicole did an outstanding job leading us to today. So for those of you that don't know, Nicole is the partner in client relations for H&CO LLP. And this is, as I said, for the second time, going through the Paycheck Protection Program forgiveness program. When we did our first program, we had an extremely fantastic response and number of outstanding feedback from the members and our members from our sisters chambers, which lead us to today. So as Nicole did explain from our first go around, which was very easy to understand terms, philosophy, program, steps to fill out for the PP second draw application papers. She answered a tremendous amount of questions. If you all remember everything that was in the chat room. So again, as Elaine said, for those of you that just joined, please use the chat room, and Nicole and Michael will be monitoring that. So the first go around, she answered a tremendous amount of our questions, gave out contact information for anyone that needed more questions, and Nicole's knowledge and professionalism was obviously evident and so appreciated by all of us, the way she made it so simple the first go around. So today, we are proud again to bring Nicole back once again for a step-by-step, easy to understand, step-by-step program through the PPP forgiveness application process. And once again, to answer of your any questions, because earlier, like Michael was saying, where he's received certain documentation and not certain documentation and questions, as this process moves forward, it's very fortunate for us to have somebody like Nicole to be able to answer all of our questions and as a resource to us. So that being said, Nicole, we're delighted to have you back again today, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the lovely comments and the kind comments from everyone via email and the lovely introductions. For any reason you sent me an email and I haven't been able to get back to you, please resend it. I think I've gotten back to almost all of them, but sometimes I miss things. So my email is right here. I'll show it again at the end of the presentation. If it's not something we cover fully or you have a very detailed issue, let me know. I'm happy to answer. I'm a partner at H&CO. I've been here for 11 years. Well, actually, it's going to be 12 years. We work in all areas of accounting, tax assurance, and technology. We got head deep into PPP when it first came out because we saw it was an incredible resource for our clients. And I feel like it's been Groundhog's Day every day for the past year, continuing to talk about PPP, and then they did round 2. So it's a topic I enjoy because I think it does provide a lot of help. And I sympathize with many people that their accountants may not be too knowledgeable about this matter because it was a very complicated year for people to learn something new. So I'm happy to answer. Don't worry if we're not your accountant, you don't have to necessarily change to us. For me, it's very simple to answer a lot of your questions. So please feel free to reach out. Happy to do so. So we're going to cover the PPP forgiveness process, not to be confused with the application. I see a lot of people saying, I sent in my application, I haven't heard back, and it comes out that they only sent their application for round 2, but they haven't yet submitted their forgiveness application. So these are several different moving pieces. We're purely going to speak about forgiveness application, not application to obtain second draw. There are 3 different types of forgiveness applications. And before I go into it, I wanted to answer one of the questions that I saw, which asked if somebody should be following along with a form or website. And the answer is no. Why? Because you can only apply for forgiveness with your lender. And while those are the application questions, the layout is entirely different depending on your lender. I'll go back to that slide, but let me show you, for example. These are different emails my clients have gotten from various banks. If you applied with Chase, Popular, Regions, Bank of America, any of the banks, they're sending an email with a link for the most part. Every bank's different, but the major banks, you either apply directly through your business banking login, or you submit a request and they'll send you a link. But every single bank has a different process, unfortunately. It would have been ideal that they all adopt the same, but they all have a different process. They're all doing things slightly different. So you can only apply through your lender, but you're going to answer the same questions that we're going to go over that are part of the actual applications that you might have seen, which are these. These are the actual applications. We'll cover this in more detail. There's 3 different ones, but this is not at all what you're going to fill out in 90% of the cases. The banks have each created online version of this. So the first level of application is for loans $150,000 or less, or for any self-employed. That's going to cover a large majority. They say that covers 70%. It used to be $50,000 or less, but now as of December 20, I believe as of October, they moved it to $150,000 or less. So that captures a large majority of borrowers. And that's great because that's only one page. I'll show you that in more detail. If your loan is over $150,000 or less, you then have 2 options, the 3508 easy version or the regular application. The easy version qualifies if your loan is over $150,000 and you meet any of these 2 criteria. You didn't reduce salary or hourly wages for any employee by more than 25% during the covered period compared to the most recent covered period, and you didn't reduce number of employees or average paid hours. Or you meet this criteria. You didn't reduce our hourly or salary wages during the covered period. And during the covered period, you were also subject to restrictions and closures that directly or indirectly affected you. So while you might have reduced your number of full-time employees, which is what FTE is, you still meet one of these safe harbors because you were in an industry or business that was heavily impacted. So those are the safe harbors. And if you don't meet any of those criteria, then there's a regular application, which is what first came out, that had tables and different schedules and was very complex. So thankfully, they've really streamlined them. Documents you'll need, regardless of your type of loan, is your SBA loan note. I saw someone ask, where's the SBA loan number? What I have seen in my experience is that some banks that you applied with, when you log in and enter your information, an EIN or something else, they'll already have your SBA loan number and your borrower loan number, which only they have. Or they may request this. And this is the note. This was the first page that you got from when you got your first loan, and it's got the SBA loan number. If you don't have this note, check the direct deposit into your bank statement. When they first deposited the funds, the actual detail that's going to show in the transaction is going to include the SBA loan number. So that's the SBA loan number. The borrower number is not available within this. It's only through the bank. If you have to ask your bank for it and they haven't answered, perhaps it's part of the application, built into the application already. And again, it varies bank by bank, unfortunately. You will also need payroll tax reports, unless you're a self-employed Schedule C filer. You'll also need payroll reports, which will show the various ones there are, and ADP, Paychecks, Gusto. Large majority of payroll providers have their own version of these reports pre-made purely for forgiveness. Bank statements during the covered period. I've seen a lot of banks request this, even if you're a client with them. And the reason they're requesting information that you say, but they already have this, is that the bankers are not reviewing these. They are hiring CPA firms. So we are the back office for several banks. Every bank has a CPA firm. Some of them are outsourcing to various countries. So those individuals have to request information that they have no access to. And that's why they're requesting so much. If the banker were reviewing the application, they wouldn't be asking you these basic criteria. But assume that it's a stranger working on behalf of the bank that's reviewing all of these, and that's why they're going to ask for information that seems like duplicate. Non-payroll expense details, we'll cover that based on the type of expense. You'll see that I'm going to recommend you only use payroll to qualify for forgiveness. Even if you spent it on rent, you can put all your payroll amount and put 0, and we'll go into that application. The deadline to apply for forgiveness. This was a question that Michael said he had received, that somebody mentioned that they received a coupon with an interest amount due. So the second you received the loan, you started incurring interest, but that interest is forgiven, is part of the forgivable amount. But you started incurring interest. However, that interest payment is deferred. And if you apply for your loan forgiveness within 10 months after the date of the last day of the borrower's loan forgiveness covered period, loan payments are no longer deferred and the borrower must begin making payments on the loan. So in essence, the deadline to apply for forgiveness before you have to start making any payments would be 10 months after the last day of the borrower's loan forgiveness covered period. So let's look real quickly what a covered period would entail. Covered period starts the day you receive the funds into your bank. Okay, so you receive the funds into your bank, that's day 1. The typical covered period ends 24 weeks, even though now you can choose to end it sooner. But the standard covered period end is 24 weeks. So you say how many days? There's 7 days in a week and there's 24 weeks. So, oops, that would actually be 168. So if you go this plus 167, because you count day 1 when you received it as the first day, that would produce that. If you want to use a shorter amount of weeks, you can in Excel put the date, put the number, and that's going to give you the end of the covered period. So 10 months after October 11th, 2020 is the time frame that the borrower has to submit the forgiveness application. Otherwise, if they wait longer, loan payments may start being due. If you're forgiven, then you can get that reimbursed, but you definitely don't want to do that. You want to apply for loan forgiveness within the 10-month covered period. Some banks have sent interest statements showing this is the amount of interest you've incurred, but don't worry about that because it's going to be that's part of the forgiveness amount. If they forgive your loan, they forgive the interest that's allocated. The way this works, so you understand why it's happening, banks lent their money. The SBA said, I guarantee that for you. When the bank gets a forgiveness application, they review and they submit it to the SBA is going to reimburse the bank for the amount that they lent plus interest. That's why banks are willing to do this. They're getting paid a fee and they're getting reimbursed for the interest that they were charging you. So your forgiveness amount ends up being a little bit higher depending on how the bank's going to show it. And that higher amount is because they're forgiving the interest that's been incurring since the day you were issued the loan. So nothing is due unless you have applied for forgiveness and you got forgiven on a lower amount, or because the bank's just sending those statements. Not every single bank is, everyone's acting in their own method. So I'm sure that causes some confusion, but just be aware of that. Interest payments, so it says as long as the borrower submits its loan forgiveness application within 10 months, the borrower is not required to make any payments until the forgiveness amount is remitted to the lender by the SBA. If the loan is fully forgiven, the borrower is not responsible for any payments. This comes directly off the SBA site. I'm not making this up, so do not worry if you've received a coupon. Only worry if you didn't apply, if you applied for forgiveness and you know for a fact that you were only forgiven on a lower amount. Okay. This is a checklist. This is a criteria. I'll be sharing this presentation. You can see it's also available on the actual loan applications. Okay. This is a variety of different formats the bank can tell you that they're accepting loan forgiveness applications. They had paused this back in December, right when they knew Congress was voting on these changes. They had implemented this entire process, created the applications. Congress then voted to change it. They had to halt it, revise their systems, restart. Simultaneously, round 2 started. The bank said, we're getting overwhelmed with forgiveness applications and round 2 applications. We're going to stop the forgiveness because there's no rush. You still have 10 months. So most people, the deadline's August, while we focus on the second draw. I've seen some banks only in the past week start to receive forgiveness applications again. So don't be concerned if they're not letting you. Some banks have said we're not going to start until March 15th. That's not an issue at all. Again, we're going to go into the application itself, but in summary, what's eligible for forgiveness? Payroll costs, which include salaries, wages, healthcare expenses paid by the employer are counted as payroll costs, retirement contributions, commissions, hazard pay, etc. Anything that was subject to payroll tax, you can assume is part of the payroll compensation. They also did allow some benefits and clarified some benefits. So if that pertains to you and you have like cafeteria pay, they did start allowing that, even though that's not going to show in the 941s. I don't mean to speak complex terms, but I'll cover that in more detail. The maximum you could pay any one employee, not being an owner employee, if you use a full 24 weeks, which I recommend many do because it'll make your life easier, as you'll see, is $46,154. Where does that number come from? It comes from getting 100,000, which was the cap, dividing it by 52 weeks, multiplying that by 24 weeks, 46,153. Before it used to be 8 weeks. So that 1923, which is 100,000 divided by 52 times 8, gives you that 15,385 that everyone's been seeing, I'm sure, all over the place. So that's the maximum you can pay any one employee if you use the full 24 weeks. If you use less weeks, you do the pro rata share. You take 100,000 divided by 52, that amount times the amount of weeks that you wanted to use. But there's really no harm in using the full 24 weeks, even if you've had reductions, depending on the amounts, which you'll see. You can include payroll that was paid or incurred during the covered period. So if you got your loan on April 27th, and then on April 28th is when you pay payroll, even though you're paying for the 2 weeks before, that counts because it's payroll cost that has been paid. If your covered period ends the October 15th, but you're actually paying payroll for those 2 weeks on the 18th, that was incurred during the covered period, so that would count again. The loan that they gave you was 2.5 months worth of payroll, which is basically 10 weeks, and they're giving you 24 weeks. So it's very easy to use way more than what they gave you during the full 24 weeks. They're not asking you, what did you spend of the PPP loan amount? They're saying, how much did you spend on payroll? Assuming that that amount's in there. It's not, that was that dollar that we gave you spent on this. So don't worry too much about, why is it 24 weeks if they only gave me 10 weeks? I spent from my own cash. That's understood. And that was to help make this process simpler. Non-payroll costs eligible for forgiveness. As before and as remained since initial, you included the payments of interest on mortgage obligations on real or personal property incurred before February 15th, rent payments on lease agreements enforced before February 15th, 2020, utility payments under service agreements. This is the same forgiveness rules that are going to apply for round 2 unless they make any changes. So round 1 for PPP, this is a forgiveness process. Round 2, same forgiveness process. The same February 15th date will continue to apply for round 2. What they expanded on December 27th was the following, and that's why they had to revamp all the applications to include this. They're now also allowing covered operations expenditures, which include payments for software, anything that helps you operate your business in terms of functionalities or softwares, covered property damage costs, anything related to damage or vandalism or looting due to the public disturbances that occurred between 2020, not covered by insurance, covered supplier costs, anything that's essential to the operations of the bar at the time at which the expenditure is made, anything made pursuant to a contract or purchase order, and covered worker protection expenditures, which is if you had to make any, put any separations, any of those glass panelings, buy protection for all your employees, all of that is eligible as a non-payroll cost. Still remains in round 1 and round 2 of PPP that 60% of your loan must have been spent on payroll, not more than 40. So eligible non-payroll costs cannot exceed 40%. Okay, if you applied before December 27th, and for some reason you didn't have enough to meet forgiveness, and now that you see these new additions, unfortunately, you're not, you cannot revise your loan. So I was telling many people, I'm like, hold on, slow down, do not try to apply right away. The rules keep getting more and more lenient, but most people listened, some people didn't, and then this would have helped them greatly. So right now, I think we know everything we need to know about forgiveness, but you still never know. So never, don't rush into it. At this point for round one, yes, this is the rules, this is how it's going to be. For round two, we'll see how that happens. Owner employee compensation, I keep seeing this issue arise time and time again with a lot of clients, a lot of people that call me, a lot of questions I hear. While $46,153 is the maximum you can pay to any employee, owners were always capped. I don't know why, doesn't necessarily make sense, but owners were capped. So the most you can submit for forgiveness for an owner employee is either 8 weeks worth, which would be the $15,385, or 2.5 months worth, which would be $20,833. 100,000 divided by 12 times 2.5. So if you had 2 employees, you being an owner employee, and you got a loan for 40,000, even though that's less than 46, the most any owner can pay themselves with PPP forgiven funds is, or the most anyone can get in forgiven amounts is 20,833 per owner. For C Corps, you can include employer retirement, health insurance contributions. S Corps, you can only include the retirement contributions, not the health contributions for an S Corp owner. An S Corp owner is anyone with at least a 2% stake for this purpose. Self-employed are capped by the amount of their owner compensation replacement calculated based on 2019 profit. You'll see that that's very easy to meet, especially given the layout of the application. So this is going back to how a self-employed, anyone that files a Schedule C. So if you have an LLC with one owner, the LLC doesn't file its own return. You're filing the Schedule C within your Form 1040. And your loan amount was based on the line 31 net profit. So they got that, divided it by 12 times 2.5. So in this case, your loan amount is $12,500. When you apply for forgiveness, obviously you use the 24 weeks and you say, how much did you spend on payroll? $12,500. So that should be automatic forgiven, but you still have to submit an application for forgiveness to be forgiven. It has to go to the SBA. You're not going to be automatically forgiven, like in the sense that there is no steps required. So I had seen a question, or somebody assumed that they had been automatically forgiven. No, you've heard of automatic forgiveness, but it's in the sense that the application is very, very, very simple. Before I go into the other items that apply more to a more complex loan, I'm going to go into the step by step. These are the questions that they will ask you in the bank. It's not going to look like this necessarily, but it's going to be arranged in this format. Obviously, your business name. If you're an individual, sole proprietor, or an LLC, the legal name of the borrower. So whoever the note was issued to, was it issued to you personally or to your LLC? The business TIN, if it's you as a sole proprietor, your social. If it's you through an LLC and the note is issued, the SBA note is issued to your LLC, then the EIN of that LLC. First draw or second draw, we're talking about first draw right now. A few people have been funded for second draw. The loan number, hopefully your bank has that already pre-programmed into it, but if not, look at the bank statement when you were first deposited the loan, because that's going to show you a 9-digit number, or gather the loan note, and that's going to have that information as well. The loan amount, the disbursement date, employees at time of application. I'm assuming I'm a single self-employed Schedule C filer, so 1. Covered period, you can now use between 8 to 24 weeks. So if you want to use 13 weeks, 10 weeks, 8 weeks, here we're using 10 weeks because they gave us 10 weeks worth of payroll, and that's all I'm using it for. My loan amount was $15,000. So if I got a loan amount for $15,000, that must mean that was, so I take, this is my loan amount, $15,000, divide that by 2.5, that times 12 that's what your line 31 should be, the reverse of that. Because if you take that divided by 12 times 2.5, it's going to be the same. So if you use 10 weeks, If we divide this by 52, now this times 10. Okay, so it's never exactly precisely right, but you'll use the amount of weeks it takes to have spent that all on yourself. That's the simplest way for a Schedule C. So you're not going to have payroll tax forms. Why? Because you don't have payroll in the way a company that has employees has payroll. You don't file 941s. So your loan forgiveness documentation is going to be the Schedule C that you filed for 2019, if that's what you use to get your loan amount. In second draw, if you're using your 2020 Schedule C, that's going to, the one that you have already filed with the IRS is going to be what you use at the forgiveness time. They may request bank statements to see, but there's really no way to prove payroll for a self-employed other than through their Schedule C if they didn't have any employees. It's literally, what is your loan amount? How much did you spend in payroll? How much are you requesting forgiveness on? Oops. Okay, so if your loan amount was this, how much did you spend on payroll? If you're self-employed, you spent that same amount, and what is your requested forgiveness amount? You could have also spent it on rent, but you're gonna have to then provide that documentation. While it's so easy to just have spent it all on payroll, if that's actually what your Schedule C ends up being. I did see people, not necessarily our clients, but some people try to get a higher loan by submitting a pro forma Schedule C that had $100,000 as a net income. Then when it's time to apply for forgiveness, they show 70,000. So if you got 100,000, then your maximum loan is 20,833. If the Schedule C you ended up filing shows 70,000 as your line 31, then that divided by 12 times 2.5 should have been your loan amount. So the amount you spent on payroll was 14,583, or I'm sorry, 12 multiply times 2.5. Okay, comes out to the same amount. So that's the amount that you spent on payroll. You need to have other expenses to qualify for the full forgiveness, but essentially you were supposed to submit the Schedule C that you ended up filing with the IRS. I saw a question about how can I see shared screen? Can anyone,
At this point, I don't know how to answer that. Everybody's appears different. Maybe she's looking at an iPhone, so I would just continue at this point.
okay, so you can, but you can see my screen, Michael?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, you're good.
perfect, thanks. I was concerned about that. Okay, so let me check any questions regarding Schedule C filers. If you have employees, well, let's see any questions for Schedule C filers. It says, I am self-employed. I got a PPP loan for the first round. The amount was 2.5 times my monthly income. Can I say the forgiveness application that my covered period is 2.5 months and the entire loan went to cover my monthly income? Anna Polyakova, yes, the answer is yes. So your covered period was the 2.5 months and your total loan was the amount of spent on payroll costs. So that's why this is seen to be automatic forgiveness. However, you do have to include documentation because they're not, a lot of loans were fraudulently given. So they want to make sure that you did actually qualify. And that's why you have to submit your Schedule C and any other documents the banks may request. They know not to request a Forms 941, but they may request bank statements or any 1099s, some other things here and there. No bank is being extremely consistent. What documents are needed? QuickBooks payroll summary for the 12-week period. So the documents needed for forgiveness for a Schedule C filer are your Schedule C that was actually submitted and filed. Perhaps your bank statements, but at least your Schedule C that was filed, okay? They want to make sure that you actually spent that or had some type of activity and that you were qualified to begin with. Part of the forgiveness process is to make sure that you were eligible in the first place. If you're not a Schedule C filer and you have a loan of 100,000, you still would use the same format. So if your loan was 100,000 and you had, don't worry about this amount too much. Employees at the time of loan application 5, employees at the time of forgiveness 4. This is to qualify you in terms of were you eligible? So if you put that you have 500 or 501, and then you still have 502, you weren't eligible, because employees are not the same thing as FTEs. So don't worry too much about when they're asking employees. Employees includes even you as an owner employee. So if you had a loan for 100,000, you would still use this form, even if you had reductions in staff, etc. This is not going to affect you. How much did you spend on payroll costs during the amount of time, which could be 8 to 24 weeks? Obviously, I hope that you can meet it on purely your loan amount. There are other eligible costs that you can use, but you're requesting forgiveness for 100,000, therefore this should be at least 75,000. But this is the same format that goes for any loan, $150,000 or less. In terms of documentation, this is for all borrowers. So whether you're submitting the loan, the application for $150,000 or less, this will apply to you if you had employees. Bank account statements or third-party payroll service provider reports, tax forms, which are the Form 941 and the state quarterly business and individual employee wage reporting. Again, not if you're a Schedule C, this doesn't apply to you, but because you don't have to necessarily be a Schedule C to use this loan, I'm combining both statements. Payment receipts, canceled checks, or account statements documenting the amount of any employer contributions to employee health and retirement plans. If you use ADP, for example, every single company has come out with their own format of forgiveness reports. So ADP has a forgiveness reports overview. Where do I find them? They show you exactly how to get there. It's gonna be great for you if you had employees. If you're Schedule C, don't worry about this. Only your Form 1040 is gonna be what's needed for forgiveness. But all other, if you're $150,000 or less, or more than $150,000 loan or less, and you use ADP, they'll have some type of report. Gusto, another common payroll provider, also has these types of reports. Paychecks, every single payroll company, they put the payroll company and then type in their BBP forgiveness, and it'll most likely lead you to exactly how to log in to get those reports, which will be your tax forms and your payroll summary reports. We're focusing right now on the $150,000 or less application version. Many banks, despite you submitting an application for a simple or for an easy, they still want certain proof. I don't know why. Perhaps in the banking systems, they couldn't really specify for this application, only request this. So you may be requested information that you say, hey, I'm not even required to provide this, but the banks have the right and authority to request whatever they want to verify that information. So even if you didn't reduce any employees and you qualify for the easy, or your loan is $150,000 or less, but you had payroll, they will still want the payroll forms or payroll reports. Some of them may request the FTE documentation. FTE is this. So a simple scenario, these are all made up names. This is how much I spent during my covered period on these employees. I spent a total of $142,215. Their FTE is going to be either a 1 if they were paid for 40 hours or more, or a 0.5 if they're paid less than 40 hours. If they're full-time, part-time, which is this scenario, it would be a 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and then a 1 and a 1 for everyone that was full-time. The total of that is 3.5. So while I have 5 employees, I have 3.5 FTEs. This is table 1, because this is any employee that's paid on average less than 100,000. If I had employees that are paid more than 100,000, I'd have that in table 2, which is going to be part of the application that's laid out. Owner employees don't have an FTE. So even if you have 2 owner employees, they're never requested the number of FTEs that they have. So your total FTE is 3.5. You can compare that to a reference period of your choice. The reference periods available, hold on, and I'll pull that up here. This is like in the full detail, the full version one, which many of you have seen this, even if your loan is the simplest one, for some unforeseen reason, they're requesting this detail. The average FTE during the borrower's chosen reference period. So that chosen reference period is how many FTEs, full-time and part-time, did you have from January 1st through February 29th, 2020? Or how many FTEs did you have between February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019? You're gonna wanna choose the one that has a lower amount of FTEs. So if between 1/1/2020 through February 2/29, 2020, I had 5 full-time employees or 4 full-time employees and 1 part-time, I would have 4.5. Why? Because a 1 for every full-time, a 0.5 for every part-time. That's a simple version. The other version wants you to divide the number of paid hours to arrive at an average sum. I promise you, this will always be the simplest version. If you don't meet forgiveness this way, it may be worth looking at the other way, but many people can meet forgiveness this way. And then they say, how many employees did you have from 2/15/2019 through 6/30/2019? So this is reference period 1, and this is actually reference period 2. So if I had 4.5 and this time I had 5.0 and now I have 3.5, I'm going to want to use the lowest amount. So that's why in the actual application, I would put 4.5. They don't say which period are you choosing, but that's how many I had between January 1st through February 29th. Now I have 3.5. So my FTE reduction quotient is 0.778. I do this because I want people to know that even if you reduced employees, you can still qualify for full forgiveness. So this is an Excel version of the application you just saw. That's the amount spent on employees. This is how much was spent on owner employees. There's 2 owner employees. So if you divide this by 2, you'll see that they don't meet that. These owner employees in 2019 had over $100,000 on their W-2, so that's why they qualify for the full $20,833. If their W-2s in 2019 were less, this amount has to be less because you're capping the owner employees. And they want to see that laid out, especially on the full version of the application. If you're a simple version, which is just self-employed or less than 150,000, don't worry too much about this, even though this still has to apply to you. They just don't need to see it laid out, but you, Scouts Honor, have to submit the correct amounts. So total payroll cost is 183,881. Okay, so in this sample, they had 155,000. 7 employees, that doesn't matter. If this goes to 5, that doesn't matter. They're not asking FTE. I'm using the full 24 weeks because since I had reductions in my number of FTEs, I want to get as much payroll costs as possible. So I got a loan for 155,000. I had reductions in payroll. So I spent 183 during the 24 weeks. And I spent 20,000 in rent, 5,000 in utility, 25,000 supplier costs. So I spent a total of 233,881. So this reduces that amount to 181. And this is exactly how the application questions are laid out. They say, what is the modified total, which is basically this quotient multiplied by the total, which takes into account any reductions here that are going to be minimal, if any. What is your loan amount? And what is this times 60? This divided by 60. And that's going to produce these 3 amounts. Your forgiveness is going to be the lesser. So although I reduced staff because I used a full 24 weeks of payroll and I had other costs, I'm still qualifying for the full forgiveness because the lowest amount of these comes out to 155. Now, if I spent 0 there, I'm still okay because I spent 213. When you multiply it by the quotient, it gives you 166. My loan amount is still smaller than that. Now, if you reduce this, it's going to give you only 188 times 0.77, 146. Your forgiveness amount is the smaller of these 3 lines. So there, I wouldn't qualify for full forgiveness. I'd have a loan, a 5-year loan at 1% interest rate of 8,092. That's not too terrible either. But you want to, if you reduced FTE, you may want to use a full 24 weeks if you had any reductions because you'll still you can still qualify for forgiveness. Let's say I did a large reduction, but I spent 50,000 on that and 25,000 here. My forgiveness amount is still limited to line 1 because of the total that I spent, 60% wasn't spent on payroll. Well, I'm sorry, not the 60%. My loan amount is still reduced because of the reduction. This isn't a large enough amount, but what I actually wanted to show was 50. Let's say I spent in this way. Here, because I didn't spend 60% on payroll, which is basically you take the amount on line 1 divided by 0.6, that's how much your loan amount should have been in order for you to have only spent 60% on payroll. You're going to be subject to only forgiveness on 883,333. So these equations don't necessarily hurt you if you had a reduction in FTE, but you definitely always have to meet 60% of the total amount spent on payroll. Otherwise, you're limited to this amount indefinitely. This is a first limitation. So that is only for loans that don't qualify for $150,000 or less, having to lay that out, and loans that don't qualify for the easy version, which just requires this full layout. So business name, business address, TIN, contact, what's your loan amount, what is your covered period, and how much did you spend on these costs during your covered period. So in this simplified version, they got a loan for 300,000. They did have rent, they did have utilities, they did have lease, they did have all these other things. To not have to supply so much documentation, they're only using the payroll costs, and they qualify for full forgiveness because the smallest amount of these 3 line items comes out to 300,000, and that's their total loan amount. This one is for everyone else. If your loan is over 150,000 and you did make reductions since January and you don't meet any of the safe harbors, you have to do the full version, which the only difference between this and the others is that there's a Schedule A worksheet. And this Schedule A worksheet wants a breakdown of how much did you pay to employees in Table 1. Table 1 being any employee that's paid less than $100,000 a year, or employees that started in that are new. How much do you pay to employees in Table 2? Break down the employee insurance, retirement plan, local taxes assessed, and compensation to owners. Many of the applications with the banks are still going to request the information in this format. And that's why I show you this, because these applications, while they should be exactly what the bank's requesting, to simplify the bank's process, they kind of kept it very general. But don't worry, because this is all that information in one, except for self-employed. That one is definitely, except for the self-employed and the ones $150,000 or less. Those will always be very much more simpler than the others. Okay, let me see. Oops, I have a lot of questions, so I want to see if they relate to this before we go into this in more detail. My CPA told me I could pay my employee via PayPal, so I did. I 100% paid my employee. When I print the report, it's an Excel spreadsheet. Will this work? No. That will not work because the banks will want to see and must see a 941 if you had employees. 941 is your quarterly federal tax return for reporting payroll and the amounts that were subject to FICA and the amounts that you withheld. You can pay an employee in either format, but so long as you have the 941 and the 940, that's the tax forms, then you can provide an Excel as additional detail, just like I have an Excel here. If your PayPal report comes out with a layout of this format or another, that's okay. It's just not going to be the only thing that the bank will accept. They'll accept this that supplements the data, especially if it's printed by a third-party payroll report, but they will require that you submit 941s, because if you have employees on payroll, 100% you are required to file this quarterly federal tax return. If you have employees on payroll in Florida, there's also an RT6 report that's filed quarterly. That's what the banks absolutely will require when applying for round 2 loan and also when applying for forgiveness. So those Excel reports from any provider of payroll or support help give the breakdown, but what's going to be 100% what verifies that it was spent on payroll are the 941s, unless you're Schedule C, self-employed. Okay. Somebody says, if I got money from another source, does this conflict with my PPP loan money? No. If you got money from another source, that does not conflict with your PPP. It depends. Well, okay. So if you got an employer not employer retention credit, but if you got the Families First Coronavirus CARES Act credit, those wages aren't eligible for forgiveness. Okay, so let's say that you paid somebody $12,000 during the covered period, but at one point they were sick, caring for a loved one, so they were eligible for a credit and they got a credit of $3,000. And you can only apply for forgiveness for the covered period using $9,000 of those wages. Okay, but any other funds, I don't necessarily think coincide with the PPP. So please clarify that question a bit more, and I can see if it's something I can answer. Okay, let me go back to. I'll leave it on this page while I look at the questions. If I use 12 weeks for my covered period, my money will be used up for payroll. Is that okay? Yes. I recommend you always just use payroll, because any other documentation is tedious to get unless you have it readily available. I got a $12,000 loan for my cottage rental, which was affected by COVID. I'll never recover the last month's income, but I did survive. Happy for you, Susan. But perhaps that wasn't a PPP loan. Perhaps that was an economic injury disaster loan, which was given to companies that didn't necessarily have payroll, but they had an economic injury caused by the disaster, which is coronavirus. COVID-19 was proclaimed a disaster, which is why they made the economic injury disaster loans eligible for during the coronavirus period. Anna asks, I am self-employed. I got a PPP first round. Okay, I'm sorry. That was a question about being able to only use PPP, and yes. What documents are needed? QuickBooks payroll summary for the 12-week period as above. If you're self-employed, not necessarily do you need to provide a payroll summary, so the Schedule C will be suffice. But if you have employees, then a payroll summary report showing how much was paid during the covered period will help, as well as the 941s and the 940s for that quarter. What happens if the bank or lending institution who processed the PPP doesn't activate the forgiveness application on time? They will 100% do that. There's no way to apply directly with the SBA. Your covered period, typically if you got your loan May or April, your covered period is not ending until October, which means that you have until August or September of this year to apply for forgiveness. The banks are all going to reactivate their forgiveness applications portals within the next month or so. But don't worry, there's no way that they're going to delay that any longer. And definitely you cannot apply with anyone else for forgiveness besides your lender. Your lender has to communicate your loan to the SBA, get the forgiveness, and work it out in that way. You can't apply directly with SBA. No way at all. If you think you've applied for forgiveness with SBA, promise you, you do not check that again, because you can only apply with your lender. Some lenders never even started taking applications until now, which is actually the best approach because there's so many changes. Don't worry, it'll happen within time. Once the loan is forgiven, what is the journal entry to record the forgiveness on the financial statements and tax returns? This is a great question. This is a very contentious issue arising all around. Loans that were forgiven before, they said that you weren't eligible to take the deduction, that was removed. So when you receive the loan, you could have included it as a liability, but then deducted all the expenses paid with it. Now that you're forgiven, that will go into non-taxable other income. Many people say, well, I got forgiven in January 15th, 2021. Can I remove that liability from my balance sheet as of December 31st, 2020? You shouldn't, technically, because you did have that liability as of December 31st, 2020, even though you didn't, even though you knew you'd qualify for forgiveness, every CPA firm I see taking slightly different approach for financial statements. If it's something that's going to strongly affect the borrower, they are listing the liability, but then saying, please note, a footnote saying that it was forgiven and therefore is no longer liability, or not including the liability in the footnote regarding that. But it's going to remove the liability and increase non-taxable other income. So it doesn't affect you from an income tax standpoint, but the liability is extinguished when you've been forgiven, and that's treated as non-taxable other income. Okay. Regarding S Corp owner forgiveness, does Medicare premiums and supplemental plan premiums count as insurance contribution? Anything paid by the employer, not for an owner employee for an S Corp, but for employees, but paid by the employer, is eligible as a health insurance cost, including premiums. So I'm not entirely sure if the Medicare premium, supplemental premium, as long as it's paid by the employer for employees and you have canceled checks and invoices from your insurance provider proving that, that will count. But try running the reports in different formats and seeing if you don't even have to include the insurance costs. In this example, they did have health insurance, but because they spent a hefty amount on payroll during the covered period, we didn't have to use anything other than that. What if you have employees and you file Schedule C? Okay, if you have employees and you file Schedule C and your loan is less than 150,000, you still will use this version. However, when you put the payroll costs, you have to provide the 941s and the 940s. But this is still your application if your loan is $150,000 or less. They want to know how much did you spend during the covered period. They're not asking, did you reduce FTE? So maybe you did, but that's not a question. Your owner compensation is still limited to the 2.5. So this is literally Scout's honor and that they're requesting this detail. They're doing it to make the bank's life a lot easier. But the SBA can at any point review any loan that they question. So make sure you're including the correct amounts. And even if you only spent that on payroll, so let's say that, and you have other expenses paid on other amounts, you can request a full forgiveness amount. That should be 60% of this amount though, or more than 60% of this amount. PPP and SBA loans are considered the same. No, not so much, because PPP is a program being administered by the SBA. The SBA themselves have other loans. Okay, they have different funding programs right now called the EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Economic Injury Disaster Grant, which was a up to $10,000 grant. When I hear someone say SBA loan, I don't automatically assume it's PPP. I could assume it's PPP or an economic injury disaster loan, a grant, or a 7A loan, a totally separate, non-related 7A loan. So these are all the different types of loans that the SBA has. The one that was being heavily promoted was the the economic injury disaster loan, but that is purely for those that can demonstrate economic injury disaster. If you didn't have a reduction in revenue, if the coronavirus didn't affect your business, you can still qualify for maybe a 7A SBA loan, but not the economic injury disaster loan. Okay. Important to note also, for those that are applying for PPP second draw, there is going to be a pause on any loan application that's for a company with more than 20 employees. President Biden announced that he wants to focus these next 2 weeks to process applications for PPP loans for companies with less than 20 employees. This came up here and it's also a separate announcement. So just wanted to let you know that. Do we have to claim the PPP money on our 2020 taxes? The PPP money is not taxable income, so it's not included in your revenue. That's like a different, depending on the type of return that you file, that's stated differently, but it's not part of your revenue. Because if you put it as part of your revenue, then it's going to be taxable depending on your expenses. Do not include that as part of your revenue. It's non-taxable other income, okay? But so you may have to state it depending on your type of return, but you're not taxed on it. Therefore, do not, make sure that in your revenue, look at your tax return this year especially, make sure that those revenue amounts do not include the forgiven PPP funds, because that was entirely missed. I see a question, does payroll to 1099 employees qualify for relief? No, because that's a contractor payment. Anything that you pay to a contractor is not subject to payroll tax. So that's not part of payroll costs. Anything that was paid through payroll and subject to Medicare, Social Security, those taxes, that's a revenue that they've been using to fund this program. That's why they're saying only if you had payroll will we give you a loan. But if you made any payments to any independent contractors that aren't necessarily suppliers, which for the most part, it's hit or miss whether they can fall within that, that wouldn't count as payroll costs. Maybe it counts as another cost, but you have to look into that. But 1099 contractors are not employees. That's not payroll. That's a payment. Why? Because if you pay somebody $10,000, you just pay them $10,000. You don't pay them $10,000 plus your portion of the Social Security and FICA taxes. No, you're paying them $10,000. That employee on that contractor on their own can obtain a loan, but they don't have to, but you can't include that as payroll costs in your loan. The disaster loan does not have to be on my taxes. The disaster loan, okay. Let me make sure I read this. The SBA disaster loan is like a PPP. I believe that's the first question. No, economic injury disaster loan. The disaster loan is an actual disaster loan. Well, that makes no sense. It's a true loan. It's not a forgivable loan. The purpose is to meet financial obligations and operating expenses that could have been met had the disaster not occurred. COVID-19 was declared as a disaster. The terms, it's a 3.75% for businesses, 2.75% for nonprofits. It's a 30-year loan, no prepayment penalties or fees. The use of proceeds, working capital and normal operating expenses. So PPP, payroll. EIDL, or economic injury disaster loan, it's got a whole plethora of different other expenses that you can use. Not easy to obtain this though. They're requesting a lot of detail to ensure that you were affected by the disaster, and that's why you need an actual loan. So you can apply here. They still are accepting applications, but it's purely for the EIDL loan. The economic injury disaster grants, I think, are paused momentarily. If you got that disaster loan, that does appear in your taxes because it's a liability and those interest payments are an expense, but it's not the PPP one. I got the disaster loan. Now, how do I consider it? Question for Suzanne. If you got the disaster loan, that's a true loan. That's a 30-year loan. It's a liability. It's not forgiven. It's got that fixed interest percentage rate. So you consider it's not forgivable though. I believe you can reject it or return it if you didn't want the loan. Otherwise, it is a 30-year loan, but it's not forgivable. Only PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, administered through your bank is forgivable. EIDL, any other SBA loan is not forgivable. That's why I really want to specify PPP and SBA, kind of related, but not at all the same thing, especially for situations like this in which you might consider that an SBA loan is forgivable when in 100% it's not forgivable. Okay. So I think I've covered all the questions that I see. Again, to summarize real quick, this is my favorite page. This is the 3 types of versions. You're applying with your bank. You have 10 months to apply. They're all going to be the same type of version of how many employees did you have, how many FTEs. FTEs are full-time employees. You assign a 1 to employees paid 40 hours or more. You assign a 0.5 to employees paid 40 to less than 40 hours. So if you have 2 employees, you could still have 1.5 FTEs, or maybe even 1 if they're both part-time. So those 2 words are separate. Documentation varies by bank, but it's typically going to be payroll tax reports unless you're self-employed. Self-employed, you wouldn't have payroll tax reports. You'd have your Schedule C as your proof. Third-party payroll reports, bank statements, and the non-interest, non-expense detail. I think this right about covers the most part. This is way too convoluted, but if anyone has an application that doesn't qualify for round 2, for an application that doesn't qualify for one of the easy ones, reach out to me. I am going to leave my email here and see if there's any more questions that I can answer. Okay.
Oh, Nicole, fantastic. I know you went over so much information, and the good thing is that this webinar was taped, so you can go back and you can review it, because I know that there was just moving a mile a minute, and you did a lot in an hour. So thank you very much, and everybody, on behalf of everybody who was part of this and who wasn't able to make it today. You have you've been giving out great info. So Elaine, I know Gary is not here, so I'm not sure if you want to close it out.
Just want to thank Nicole again, a fabulous job.
I'll share this with you so you can share with everyone. I see that question coming in.
Yeah.
I'll be sending this to you.
Right.
Great job, Nicole.
I wanted to make sure everybody knows who is on this event. You will get a copy of all these screens. So make sure that we have sent this information, and you can share it, please, with anyone you want. Nicole has been unbelievable. She has said, if you have any more questions, it's not that I need to get you as a client of my company. I just want to help you.
Yes.
So she is an incredibly talented, knowledgeable, and makes it as easy as possible for us to understand. My eyes were still rolling at certain points, but that's why we have someone like you that we can call back. So thank you, and thank everybody. Certainly thank our sister chambers, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye everyone. Bye Michael. Thank you. Thank you.